This has given definitely a big important boost to agriculture and food discussions and moving forward. At the same time, as I said, there are others that have been engaging in this. The FAST partnership is another notable one coming from Sharm el-Sheikh last year, and then we'll continue. So the question on the linkages from the Rio Convention, I think it's evident since already a couple of cover decisions in the past COP, Sharm and Glasgow, the role of biodiversity and land degradation in tackling climate change as well. So this is very good news. I do expect this will become even more critical next year, the year when again the three COPs of the three Rio Convention will happen in the same year. So I think there are big expectations for that being a year where finally all the synergies across the Rio Convention will be put together and probably have something joint moving forward. However, and I'll come back to the negotiation under the subsidiary bodies, this COP on agriculture didn't result in any agreement. Unfortunately, there will be then moving to the next year in June session in Bonn. But you know that's happened. It's a complicated topic. There is a lot of attention of all parties and stakeholders on this. So I understand that this was really a try to get something out of the negotiation, but it was not possible. Nevertheless, really important moment here at COP28 and the discussion of today. Thank you.
And then you will have to leave us because the negotiations and the draft texts are being revised. I would like to highlight how important it is for a country such as Italy, and the present and the current government is totally aware of this, of the connections between security, food securities, hydrological crisis draft, which has increased 29% over the past 10 years in the Mediterranean area. And unsurprisingly, the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, put squarely food systems within the scope of the G7. This is very important, and we also have to say that we are lucky to have international officials that are also they're working for the system, obviously, but it's good to have some friends of Italy as well. Thank you, Daniele. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to Daniele for saying hello. He's going to leave us, as said. So this is the general perspective, and we hear that, as always and very often, the COP process is separated from the reality of what is happening on the ground. What we see with the energy transition, we see a build-up of capacity of renewable, which is accelerating for purely economic reasons, whilst the process is still tightened and sometimes difficult due to the very specific democratic characteristics of the multilateral process, which we praise, which is also a reason for peace. Let's think on what is happening with the COP29 decision. How can we as businesses, that's the reason why we are here, integrate these new perspectives and make the transition happen on the ground with sustainable business models? This is why we're here. We do not do international cooperations. Our companies work to create sustainable and more sustainable operating ways, eventually moving towards a system whereby we will be able to produce within planetary boundaries. This is the ending point. We're far from there, but this is the effort, the collective effort. I'm going to ask now two international friends, the EIT Food, which represents a very important element of the food community in Europe. What is your take about what is necessary to innovate, make the food system sustainable, and what is you just launched a manifesto, what is your perspective for the upcoming commission in terms of policy suggestions to what is, please. I think it's better if you sit down here, and she will be followed by Sascha Müller-Kraner, who is the CEO of the Deutsche Umwelthilfe. We will have the part on energy later after our two companies from the food sector are going to speak. Please, Lucy.
Hello, I'm Lucy Wallace. I'm Chief of Staff at EIT Food, and I also lead the Secretariat for the Food Systems Pavilion here at COP. So EIT Food is the world's largest food innovation community. We fund research. We're actually funded by the EU, so we get the majority of our funding from the EU. So we have the mandate to be able to look at food systems transformation for the benefit of European citizens. But you need to realize that and we all realize this, food systems are not just in Europe. You can't just look at Europe alone. Food systems are global. So we need to look at those global markets and how we all sort of cooperate globally and actually look at that global context with everything that we do, which is one of the reasons why we're here. And we're not just, we're grounded in Europe, but we also have that global outlook. So some of the things we do, we connect food stakeholders from across the entire food value chain. So we work with everybody from farmers right up to consumers, including everyone in between. So entrepreneurs, startups, scale-ups, corporates, universities, knowledge partners. And this is really important for us because actually you can't just look at your small part of the food system. You can't just look at what you're doing. You need to look at how this complex system works together. And by connecting these different stakeholders, we get knowledge triangle integration, which means that you can all benefit from each other. You can start to innovate together. You can work together for systems change. The point about innovation really is that, we have the capacity as human beings to do an awful lot. We have the capacity to be able to innovate, to come up with fantastic solutions to drive real change in the food system. What we forget is that people are part of the food system as well. So we also, as well as technological innovations, we look at how we can catalyze human capacity for this as well. So education is a big part of what we do. And also public engagement is also a big part of what we do. As well as that, we are looking more and more at the people part, the human element of innovation. So innovation is just not technology, and I think that's really key. So in terms of what we can do and what we can do for food systems innovation, specifically for systems change, no one person, no one organization is going to achieve this alone. So we do need to look at how we work together. So organizations like EIT Food, which are an independent organization, connecting all of the dots, connecting people together, can really be levers of change to enable those pre-competitive collaborative spaces for innovation, which are really key when we're looking at the systems change pieces. And that's really what we're doing. And that's where we're putting a lot of our effort, is to finding those ways to join those people together, to think about the different parts of the system that require us to be able to make a systems change so that everybody can move forward together. And then we can all, people can make money, people can do what they need to do to elevate their businesses. But if we don't have that systems change piece where we work together, then we will never be able to transform our food system.
Innovation is a collective effort, and we all agree. And that is why we pulled together this panel, which is very rich in terms of competences. Because we're talking of innovation, Sasha will allow me to go online with also because we got here a representative of the Italian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and he has to leave, and he would like to listen to that. We would like to introduce very briefly Luca Linovi from Farmshine. Why are we inviting this company? First of all, it's one of our members within the Regenerative Society Foundation. So is the other company that is present today, Planet Farms. And Luca is pulling together energies in Kenya with 20,000 farmers for developing a model of agriculture which is truly sustainable, both in terms of products that are contributing to nitrogen, to the improvement of the nitrogen cycle and the soil health in the farms that is working with. Luca is a former FAO executive, is an agronomist, therefore he knows what he does. And that's the point with businesses operating in this space. We know and they know what they're doing. So please, Luca.
Good morning, Hervé, and good morning to all of you. And thanks for.
You were getting me scared, Luca.
Okay, I see that. I see myself, so I guess I'm there. Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Hervé, for invitation. Thanks to the organizers. Definitely, it's an interesting dilemma and an interesting challenge, solving two problems in one, which is making sure that smallholders, which are normally pretty much scattered in difficult area, are able to come out from a economic condition which easily lead to poverty, and at the same time solve an environmental problem. The good news is that a lot of what smallholder farmers do in very large amount of Africa is very compatible with doing agriculture right. There are missing points, missing beats, missing activity, which often lead to disaster, but with very limited amount of effort and trickling the system in a way that works better, it makes pretty easy to do it. And I would say that our objective is to come with these two objectives together, making the smallholder richer, keeping the condition for having a sustainable life in real terms, meanwhile, creating the environmental condition for regenerate the soil health, regenerate the environmental condition which are possible today. It's not an easy task because there is a lot of interaction in the middle. I think Lucy was hinting to that. If you don't look system-wise, it's very difficult to try to solve the problem because the problem is not one on and off. It's not, unfortunately, solving an innovation of a transaction or a financial transaction. You have to solve a lot of different pieces with innovation, and you have to change a system, which is complicated. We are pretty privileged because we have developed in early stage a pretty sophisticated digital platform, which allow us to reorganize our own piece of food system from the production to the trader in a way in which disintermediating the system and welcoming all the different granularity in the field allows us to decrease dramatically the cost and allowing the farmer to share a much better part of the profit that obviously are sharing with us because we are a for-profit company. Although I have a long past in the UN, in the Food Agriculture Organization, the Development Cooperation, as well as the Italian government, obviously my current stage is a for-profit company. But it's a for-profit company that can change dramatically the impact of the smallholder, which often are target of several developmental programs and often are not able to move forward because they have to combine the business with the environment.
Luca, just very briefly, as it were a pitch, what are the results, the outcomes? Can you give us some KPIs for the impacts, the positive impacts?
Sure, fine. There are positive and negative. If you want, the life is always made of mix of things. But we have increased between 25 to 35% the income of each one of the farmers from season one. So from the very first time working with us, we have decreased dramatically the cost of transport and the transport with very poor instruments. And we are changing the soil, which takes a bit longer because to change the soil in an operational terms takes a bit longer. But we've been measuring digitally all the plots where we work with, and we change and measure the changes that are happening. Obviously, because we work with a lot of crop rotation and specific crops, which allow, as you were saying, increasing nitrogen and decreasing CO2 consumption, we are seeing the change in organic matter increasing, not yet where we want to be, but there is substantial difference, significant difference. And the nitrogen is growing to the point that ideally every 5 seasons, they will be able to do 1 season of rice for free, in the sense they don't need to put any input in it, because the rice, which is a consumer of nutrients, will get it from the previous season of pulses.
And that is one of the keys for what we need to do in Europe as well. Getting rid of fertilizers, decarbonizing the agricultural systems, improving the quality of water. And we do that, and we can do that utilizing and leveraging nature-based solutions. Now, one missing piece of this project, and this is why we are actually actively looking for partnerships internationally, is the capability that we cannot meet with market models at the moment to really work for carbon farming, for sequestration, for CDR, nature-based CDRs, aligned with the upcoming frameworks that will be put forward by DG Klima. This is our light, our star. We always look at Europe and the corpus of legislation which is coming out of Brussels as, for its limits, for all that still needs to be improved, as probably the best framework for sustainability globally. And this will also have an impact on trade, redesigning the trade flows. And we need to do that in partnership with our African friends, with our international friends, and we need to integrate our friends into the European Green Deal, or we will lose out, all of us, and we will not succeed. This is actually one of the reasons why I'm inviting now Sascha Müller-Kranner, who represent Deutsche Umwelthilfe, to talk from the German perspective, also in terms of the political, let's say, fatigue around the nature part of the Green Deal and how Germany is tackling and addressing and integrating the Green Deal for Africa.
Yes, thank you very much also for having me. And I would actually really start with the policy environment in which we find ourselves, and then maybe also make some remarks on what that might mean for companies to engage, like companies here present here and in this group. Now, everyone seems to agree that we can only get to climate neutrality if we also look at the role of land use, and both the emissions coming from land use, but also the abatement potential of sustainable land use. And there has been a lot of focus on, well, the restoration of ecosystems, and that's important. But as we know, most of the land is under use. It's either forestry or it is mostly agriculture. And therefore, without talking about sustainable agriculture, we will not harvest the full potential that we have of abatement and of carbon sinks. Therefore, it is really important that in the next 5 years, the next term of the European Commission and the European Parliament, this green component of the Green Deal does not get lost. And I listened to Ursula von der Leyen's State of the European Union speech some months ago, and it was very obvious to me that she continued to talk about the energy side of things under the heading of industrial policy, but that she kind of sacrificed the green issues to the conservatives within the European People's Party. Therefore, I think we have to make a strong argument that this is not only a legal and moral obligation coming out of the UNFCCC process, and also what everyone signed up to at the CVD conference in Montreal, but it also presents huge opportunities both to reach climate neutrality, but also to reach other targets like, well, saving water, saving biodiversity, saving health, and saving nutrition.
Allow me to interrupt you a second. As a foundation of businesses, our chair and our board signed a letter in support of the nature restoration law, because without nature, you do not have business. We cannot operate any valuable and profitable business without resources that are underpriced right now. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And now let me just show you concretely what that means in my view. So when I look at an example, for example, in Germany, we have this climate law with the sectoral targets, and we have a similar approach within the European Union. And there are pretty specific targets and policy packages to achieve those targets. And there are business engagement strategies. There are a lot of business in the energy sector, in the transportation sector, that have very specific strategies to achieve climate neutrality, to make their contribution. In the land use sector, we have the headlines. We have overall targets. We actually have no specific measures, and businesses are still grappling what that actually means. So we are talking, for example, with large retailers, companies like Lidl and Aldi in Germany. So what is your contribution? So what is your contribution on the retail side, but also when you go along the supply chain? So how can you communicate in your supply chain that in your supply chain, every actor can make a contribution to carbon neutrality? So this is, I think, a huge challenge that we will be having in the coming years. And the same goes for those who invest in sustainable agricultural practices. And maybe my last thought here. So we also have to find a way to fund those endeavors. And it's relatively simple. We have the emission trading system for the industrial sectors that we have to decarbonize. But such a relatively simple approach does not work for land use, because it's not only about the carbon side, it's about the biodiversity benefit. It is about other ecosystem services like increased health, better nutrition, while keeping the water in the landscape, which is not only an issue for the Mediterranean, but also in a country of which I always thought there is enough, if not too much rain, like Germany, that we now have a water issue. So we have to find a way that those ecosystem services that are provided by sustainable land use practices are also reflected not only in the price to the consumer, but are somehow given away, somehow given back to those who make those investments.
Pricing. This is very important. Now I will call Mita from Planet Farms, because Mita represents a company that is investing into reducing the impact of agriculture on soil. And this is certainly going to be a part of the solution for tomorrow's systems. Obviously, Planet Farms also is very conscious of the impact in terms of energy. Vertical farming is destined to become a part of the solution, provided that the energy component is tackled in the right way. Mita, you work and operate with an approach of integrated LCA, and later I will say something about the overall product environmental footprint, which I think is a very important methodology upheld by the European Commission. But I now want to hear from your beautiful company that just received a huge amount of investment, if I am not wrong, even from the Italian CDP, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti.
That's right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Planet Farms, which is one of the leading companies in the vertical farming industry. For those who are less familiar with the topic, vertical farming is a technological solution that enables us to grow greens indoors in controlled environments. Planet Farms was founded in Italy in 2018. We currently have one fully operational large-scale facility in the outskirts of Milan, which is among the biggest and most advanced vertical farms in the world. It's the one you can see behind me. We also have another one in the making in northern Italy, and we'll soon expand internationally, starting with the UK, where I'm based. So yes, if we refer to sustainable development as the development that meets the needs of the current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to do the same, I would say that vertical farming in general is a great expression of that, because that's what it aims to do. So just think of the fact, for instance, that by 2050, we'll need to feed 10 billion individuals who will concentrate in urban areas. And we'll also have to deal with increasingly extreme and unpredictable weather conditions. So in that scenario, vertical farming is a very compelling solution, because it makes food production always available and reliable, extremely efficient and scalable, and is completely independent from external weather conditions. So I could build a farm near a city center, on top of a mountain, in the middle of the desert, on a ship, or even where you're now in Dubai. Our production process also enables us to save significant amounts of the precious natural resources, which we never take for granted. So first and foremost, water. By providing the plants only the amount of the water that they actually need to grow, and by providing it through the root system, we're able to save 95% of the water in the case of salads compared to traditional farming. We also save the excess water and recirculate it into the cycle. And this huge saving is also partially due to the fact that because we grow in an uncontaminated environment with no direct human contact, we can also skip the washing phase, which is traditionally needed to make vegetables ready to eat. Another crucial point is land. We save 93% of land compared to open field farming in the case of salad. By growing more cycles per year and by growing on multiple levels, we save 96% of fertilizers and, last but not least, 100% of pesticides, because of the way that we grow, we simply don't need them. So we're very happy with these numbers, which recently emerged from our life cycle assessment. And we look forward to performing even better on all those parameters in the future. Also, as we expand our product range, because right now we're producing on an industrial scale, we're only producing leafy greens and herbs. But we're also looking to include some products that are either more nutritious or that are traditionally very heavy on the environment. So one example would be cotton, because we're not only looking at the food sector. Cotton is one of the thirstiest crops out there. Imagine being able to grow it in such an efficient and scalable way. It is. We're already doing it on a small scale. Same goes for coffee. I would never have imagined that we would be able to grow coffee in Cinisello Balsamo, but we're doing it. So the potential applications of this technology are very promising and really exciting. So all in all, vertical farming is a very virtuous technology on so many levels, but environmentally speaking, as you mentioned, one of the only pain points is the carbon footprint that is generated to operate the farm 24/7, which is why this topic has been top of mind for us, and we've invested a lot of time and energy over the past year to better understand the topic.
Sorry, Mita, to interrupt you, but we got a lot to speak about, and the element and the contribution of renewable energy for decarbonizing the system is going to be addressed slightly later. Just hold on there from renewable energy grid, from the renewable, oh my goodness. Renewables Grid Initiative, I'm sorry, but before that, no, I'm confused because we were just told by Francesco Rampa, Head of Sustainable Food Systems, and is working with the envoy for food security of the Italian government, that he would like to chip in with his 2 cents. And I think we can let him do that.
Sorry, I couldn't resist in the sense that, sorry, I need to go to the airport soon, but I wanted to find a way to connect what's happening here with some of the big things announced. And Italy has the G7 presidency upcoming. So I think it's very important that you, in this type of panel, guide some of the people who make decisions on the big schemes and the big announcement. Yesterday, all ministers announced hundreds of millions of billions, AM4C, all this research money. And I think you are already doing here, including Alinovi from online, the things that we promise. And some of the policymakers and the presidents, I'm not sure, are aware that a lot is happening exactly. So we need to connect all of these dots. And clearly, as Prime Minister Meloni said, sorry, I wear 2 hats in the sense that I know the European scheme of things and I work for a foundation, but when Italy has the presidency, I also work for the Sherpa office, the Prime Minister's office. So I will be the person in charge of the food security working group of the G7, working with the special envoy, Ambassador Gatti. And the fact that Italy is here at COP, moving around, attending meetings with both the Italian Special Envoy for Climate and the Italian Special Envoy for Food is quite unique. You hear a lot of blah, blah about the integration, but here you have the 2 key people making decisions, actually moving together and wanting to integrate really food and climate. So I think we need to exploit this opportunity. And what is important to know about the G7 next year is that Prime Minister Meloni doesn't want big declarations, except we will have big declaration, of course, but they want practical investment. You know, the Italy has the Italian Climate Fund, 1 billion per year in the next 4 years. Just the first projects have been approved, but there is nearly 1 billion per year managed by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, who are also here going around with the 2 special envoys. So we need you to help us guide those investments, because we are already discussing with the African counterparts pipeline investment. The first one will be Kenya. So it's interesting to know that some of these companies are in Kenya. And Deputy Prime Minister Tajani will lead the public-private investment mission in Kenya end of March. And we need your business community, your SMEs and innovators to be there, because otherwise the standard is that those who don't need necessarily assistance will get access to the funds, the big ones, the very big ones, just for the sake of disbursing. You know how these things work off the record. So let's try to keep working together, connect the small and the big companies, the public and the private funding. Maybe Kenya could be a very first starting point if we remain in touch. And I'm very happy that you mentioned education maybe even for decision makers. I don't know whether you have programs for that, but when I look at the Italian ecosystem of development cooperation, There is so much potential, development cooperation grants, development cooperation loans, concessional loans like Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, the development agency of Italy, AICS. But we need all of you to guide, educate these people about the exact things you're already doing on the ground. So also the educational component, the training for the entrepreneurs of the large companies, of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, of those with funds, but without knowledge of the food systems is absolutely crucial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You got the money. I had to leave you the space for talking. Sasha, yes, you will be able to speak because you now understand why the EIT food is here, why the European perspective is here, why Germany is here, because we are partnering together, because the problems are not solved in Rome, the problems are not going to be solved in Brussels alone. And just for the sake of the flow of the conversation, please, Renewable Grid Initiative, when we're talking about this connection between Europe and the shoreline, South Africa, there is also huge potential for interdependency, for co-creation of the future energy system of tomorrow, tapping into the potential for renewables in Africa, and for Europe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. So just to connect also to points that have been raised by the previous speakers. So climate and biodiversity, those are interrelated, interconnected. We see here at COP this year, we see that we have a nature pavilion is very important so that we are connecting more and more the two things. Also because when we talk about land and oceans, I mean, they play the role of being carbon sinks, and so that we have to recognize them and to keep them under the objectives that we give ourselves, we need to consider their important role. Now, when it comes to energy and nature, so I work for the Renewables Grid Initiative, and this is an NGO that brings together transmission system operators and NGOs. And we brought them together to work together for one common objective, the one of the need to expand renewable energy, but also to recognize that in order to expand the renewable energy, we need electricity grids. So we need this is very much a forgotten point of the discussion sometimes, because we hear about tripling up renewables, but we also have to recognize that tripling up renewables will require then electricity grids. And this is another important part of the picture. Now, of course, it goes without saying that if we look at Europe, where we have a connected network, we have interconnections, so that not just our transmission system operators at the national level are integrating, are looking for opportunities to actually improve flexibility through renewables, and are also connecting different European countries. This is one part of the picture. But then we have to look at the African side, and the interconnectors will play a very important part. Now, we have not just projects of common interest in Europe, which are among cross-border collaborations among
Connecting
EU.
Europe facility.
Yes, yeah. But we have also projects of mutual interest that actually have been introduced in the revision of the TENI regulation. And we have one important project that will connect actually Sicily, Italy, with Tunisia. So those are key projects.
We have even better, because we got the strategic plan of Terna, which is one of the assets of the ecological and energy transition for Italy and globally, along with other companies such as Enel. And the strategic plan is strengthening the grid. The grid is the enabling techno-infrastructure for the energy transition. And that's why I love the work you're doing, you and Battaglini.
Thank you very much. And just to conclude on this, because so that's the important part. It's not just a matter of the cooperation with Africa of ensuring the supply to Europe, but it's actually the cooperation is also to then provide access to electricity for Africa. So that you mentioned earlier about the important partnership and the need to have a European and African Green Deal, so that these two aspects are brought together, and we have always to remember that this has to happen. It's not just a technology, technical aspects, but we also have then to create a dialogue and a cooperation on the environmental aspects, so that those infrastructure we need to be built in the best possible way, and also to understand how they can create. It's not just about stakeholder engagement, but it's how we can create benefits for the communities that are affected by those projects.
Absolutely, and I would like to mention very briefly, and then we will go to Sasha, who wanted to speak already. I'm sorry, Eva, that in the Mediterranean, we are seeing countries such as Spain, such as Greece, tapping into this potential of African interconnection, the Damietta cable going to Cyprus and up to the north. I think Italy, with its strategic position in the middle of the Mediterranean, should really work to become the electricity, the electron hub for Europe, together with our European partners. Portugal just had 100% renewable in the grid for 6 days, a couple of days ago. Greece, last year, 100% renewables in the grid for a few hours. Where are we? How are we going to compete? How much are we going to have to pay in differential for fossil-based electricity in the future? Sasha, your turn.
Well, at the end of the day, I guess, but then I wanted to make another suggestion, if I may, to the Italian G7 presidency, which is coming up. At the end of the day, this COP, if you simplify it very much, is about the competition between two business models. The one is the 100% renewable business model. The other one is the continuation of the existing one. And I believe that not only from a climate perspective, but also from an economic perspective, those who will not recognize the signs of times and underinvest in renewables will be the ones who will lose out in a global competition. And the interesting thing is that there are a number of countries outside of Europe, for example, Kenya, that is already close to 100% renewables in the electricity sector. And so it's very, very different also on the African continent. There are a number of countries where you have state monopolies that are well run by the traditional oil and gas interests and closely connected to the political leadership of the country. Two other countries that have made that shift and kind of leapfrogged the mistakes that we've made in Europe for too long. But now to the original theme of today's discussion. Now, in the energy sector, and in the last years, we've developed all those new innovative partnerships, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships that the European Union and the World Bank and member states signed up with countries like South Africa, like Senegal, under negotiation with India. And we have a similar scheme now for the forest sector, but we don't have it for agricultural land use yet. So why don't we have sustainable land use partnerships where we take the framework of the UNFCCC obligations, but have concrete collaboration between countries that invest something. Donor countries could be Italy, could be one or two other member states, could be the EU, and a country like Kenya or another country that commits together with the agriculture sector in their country to, well, transform the agriculture sector. So a package of, on the one hand, political commitment, on the other hand, support in funding that. Couldn't that be an interesting initiative for the Italian G7 presidency?
Well, I do not dare to give suggestions to the mandate of the G7. Yeah, this is one of the German directness, but it is true that having a company that is operating in Kenya and President Ruto is taking a leadership position with both in regard of energy and ecological transition and nature, protection of nature. The draft in Kenya has been absolutely appalling, the effects, even in terms of impoverishment of people. Having an asset such as an Italian, this is really pure marketing now, such as an Italian company and a group of companies, because let's remind our audience, we are businesses, 19 companies, mostly from Italy. We're starting internationalizing, but we are Italian companies, proudly so. And as the Presidente del Consiglio dei Ministri, Giorgia Meloni, used to say and often repeats, care for place, care for nature is not a political issue. This is a question of survival and engagement and good business for us. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to say, and one of the things I was just picking up on here, is that sort of that collaboration between different countries. And what I think it's really important for us to be doing is not just thinking that, you know, as in Europe, we know best, we've got the technological innovations, and we've just alluded to that here, that actually there's some really, really interesting technological innovations in the rest of the world. So it should never be that it's, you know, what we do in Europe should be ported out of Europe and used somewhere else, but we should be looking as well as what's happening outside of Europe. I know certainly over the last couple of weeks, I've been at COP now for I don't know how many days, quite a long time. We've met with people from all over the world, you know, so as EIT Food, and we've found some absolutely amazing innovations that are happening in different places in the world, such as in India, around regenerative agriculture, around regenerative food systems, which could really have a place in Europe. And there's a tech transfer bit of this, you know, there's an applicability of the space and the concept and the context in which you're going to apply them. But I think this is really a two-way relationship. It's not just what we're doing a sort of a transaction, it's really a sort of a regenerative type of arrangement where you work together and you use the technology that might be in different areas of the world and you work together to make it apply in other areas of the world. And I think that that's a very sort of a different way of doing things to what we're used to, because we often think that we know best in Europe. And actually we don't. You know, there are some fantastic solutions in other parts of the world. I know a lot of this panel is focused on, you know, collaboration into Africa, into sub-Saharan Africa. And that as well is a really good thing that we should be looking at, but we should really be looking at it as a deep collaboration, not as a transactional process. We have a lot to learn from each other. And I think that would be
This is absolutely the spirit of the foundation. Our companies stand for holistic approaches and deep collaboration and health. We include human health as part of a matrix and a framework for assessing the livability, the feasibility, the sustainability of our models. But talking about international collaboration, we got another friend here, Mustafa Sayed, who is the CEO and I think also the founder of the China-Pakistan Institute. Are you the founder as well? But the executive director. I'm very good with remembering your titles because we're friends. And he comes from Pakistan. We met in China. China is a bit the elephant in the room as well when we're talking about European Union relationships with Africa and what can be done and should be done in Africa together. And I invited him to talk about his perspective, his brief. We talked about the approach that we were going to take. And I didn't hear anything from him. So I'm going to be very curious to know what is going to tell us and what is going to be his 2 cents. And you can either join or come here and speak on the phone. Yeah, go there.
Thank you, Ervia. It's a pleasure to partner with the Regenerative Society and hear these very interesting voices actually this morning, and actually compare, you know, what EIT Food is doing and what Sasha's talked about sustainable farming, and of course, linking the Green Deal with Africa and the renewable energy. And actually, I couldn't agree more with you when you talk about renewable energy investments, because in Pakistan, we're talking about the green transition. And I also keep mentioning that a prerequisite for renewable energy investments is actually upgrading the grid systems first. And then only can you absorb this influx of renewable energy, which we often forget the sequence of which. But comparing some of the points here, you know, Sasha, you talked about sustainable farming and agriculture, and I come from an agrarian country, which is primarily its economy is based on agriculture. And, you know, when you talk about sustainable farming, you also have to talk about sustainable livelihood of the farmers, right? Only then can there be sustainable farming. And when you talk about sustainable livelihood, You have to see how can they be incentivized to focus and prioritize sustainable farming. And I think that's the key question, ladies and gentlemen. And I think some of the questions and answers arise from this event in and of itself, because we talked about 2 case studies, Planet Farms and Farmshine, which are doing great work. But they're exactly what we call them, case studies. They're an exception to the norm that is happening, right? And we see that why they're special is because these 2 case studies have mastered giving dividends in a localized way to the community, whereas at the same time, generating entrepreneurship for the investors. And that's what we call a win-win. But when you talk about the global south, and when you talk about South Asia, which is 25% of the population of this world, and you look at this whole belt of countries which have a demographic dividend, a population bulge, if you will, there's a shift from what used to be inherently sustainable farming in that part of the world to the opposite, industrial farming. So while we talk about in Europe, the shift towards sustainable farming, what's happening in South Asia is actually industrial farming on a mass scale, because farmers are discovering that it is more profitable for them to somehow make more money through a mass scale, capital intensive industrial farming. And a lot of the people who have been doing sustainable farming are actually going one step ahead to make housing societies on those farms, which they feel will be even more profitable for them because of the large scale rapid population growth in these countries. So they feel that making real estate on those farms will actually be more lucrative. So there's this diametric contrast when we talk about what's happening in this part of the world and from the part of the world where I come from. And the question I think that we need to address is, and this is not an easy question to address, but how can we go beyond governments and beyond policymakers? Because we keep on talking about, I feel, in these dialogues all over the world, which I attend, about governments, policymakers. But we really need to move beyond that. And I think that's a collective responsibility that companies, organizations, societies, NGOs, think tanks, companies have to work directly with the local communities, with those farmers, like that company with 20,000, Luca is working with 20,000 farmers, which you mentioned. We need, and that is the only way that we can actually address this challenge in a timely fashion. And when this was very thought-provoking, actually, hearing you, and I'm glad that I'm speaking after listening to all of you, is because I realize how behind we are of the curve and how urgent or rather how much of an emergency is becoming in this part of the world. You want to say something, Irvi?
I want to say a lot of things. And also, Sasha, we are companies, I repeat, 19 companies working on the ground for solutions. The other thing is that policy is fundamental, because if we do not change the pricing system, if we don't change the rules of the markets, if we do not change the insurances covering the harvests, if we do not change the way subsidies are allocated, we are not going to change the situation that you're describing. And this is a very important responsibility. And the WTO is starting, taking into account this dimension. Probably Sasha will want to speak in that direction. The WTO presented a 10-point plan this week, or last week at COP, starting to remodel trade flows, integrating pricing signals, and that's fundamental. We will have to reduce the trade flows globally. We will have to trade quality quality, quality. Sasha, you want to comment on something?
So my family actually comes from a very small village, and which is it's a poor region. It's not a good agricultural region. So, but there's cattle raising,
Right.
and there's cattle raising. People grow some corn and they cut the greens basically to feed the cattle. And because it's not profitable anymore now, most people drive and work at the BMW factory, but they still have the land and they do it part-time or over the weekend or in the afternoon when they come back. So now that maybe as an introduction, because I talk a lot to those people, so I still have some land, but I leased it to one of the neighbors for almost nothing. So it's not a profitable business. It's more a favor to the neighbor. In the agricultural system, when I ask people to, well, shouldn't you invest in more sustainable practices? Well, there are two problems. The one problem is that we have, low incomes of farmers. Most farmers have extremely low incomes, and they normally survive economically because the land is worth so much. So they sell off some land, they lease off some land, but the income from the agriculture itself is ridiculous.
Exactly.
And there are real problems on the consumer side, that there are some wealthy consumers like me. I can go to the organic shop, but for most consumers, food prices are a real issue. And therefore, when I ask people, well, we should transform to sustainable agriculture, this will increase the cost of agriculture and food production. So I have a difficult argument to make. So there are two things that I would suggest. The one is to look at the chain between the farmer and the consumer, where a lot of money is being made, and there we need a system of fairer prices. So this is something where we also need not only corporate responsibility, but government intervention. And the second is that the financing of the sustainable agriculture, not only of the transition, but then also of the practice, cannot only come from food prices. It must come from somewhere else, because that sustainable practice provides the long list of services that I mentioned there. We can do things through tax incentives like value-added tax, but also other ways to finance ecosystem services. There is a whole set of tools, but I'm not supposed to give a 45-minute speech. And just from this little village, to give you two examples where it works, because people are not stupid. In the neighboring village, there are two farmers that have already become organic farmers. They basically sell meat and milk products, but organically they take a surcharge, but it's for a small middle-class market. And the second one is every farmer there has a photovoltaic plant on their barn. And this is a money printing machine. This subsidizes the whole.
The subsidies is totally unbalanced in agriculture already in the system. They're totally unbalanced and moving towards intensive agriculture. We need to change that. Luca Linovi, one of the perspectives that is being debated at COP, if you're still here, Luca, I hope.
Yes, I'm here.
One of the perspectives that is still being discussed at COP is the potential for market creation for nature-based removals, which is a way potentially, if the pricing mechanism is in place, to compensate and to provide this premium price. And I was discussing with some African representatives recently. Africa has the potential, so Southeast Asia, and by the way, China is moving along another line in a different direction. The FAO is at the moment studying the transformation of agriculture in China. Luca, what is your perspective and potential? Can it be created as a business model, integrating what you already do in a sustainable and profitable way, the potential for removals in the soil and health?
I have to say that I'm really fascinated, because I think it's a very, very useful and focused group of people, which can help a lot. And I love what Mustafa was saying a few minutes ago. Sometimes I do feel a case study rather than a physical company doing stuff and trying to make our own profit and farmer profit. Thanks God, although we are not yet break even and we are a small startup, we are really fighting like lions to make something very simple, which is if you disintermediate a value chain, which is highly inefficient because people play game in the system, and you make it more efficient, you have some margin that allows the farmer to be paid better. And if you do the right agriculture procedure, it costs less to the farmer to produce more. So basically, you have two sources of mechanism that allows the system working. I'm tempted to say almost like Mustafa was portraying. I love that temptation, but I also recognize that government are very important. So I don't want to try to be pulled too much on the line, but I think if we're able to do it right, we can create that mechanism. However, I think there is a very important point here, which is most of the people eat food like if it was fuel. They don't have understanding of what they are eating. They are feeding themselves 3 times a day, and they don't have any understanding if what they're putting in their mouth is safe or is not safe. And we love to have labeling to avoid us making our brain thinking. So if it's labeled organic, is okay. Guys, most of the poisons are organic. So you can organically poison yourself. Depends what you put in your mouth. I'm really worried sometimes because we produce very low value produce in the agriculture chain, which are pulses, grains, cereals, and we trade it with large end buyer. However, very rarely we are asked about quality, and we are quality freak. We want to make sure that what people eat is 100% safe, is 100% environmental sensitive, is done in the right way, and we can make it at the current market price, making the farmer increasing 30-35% per season their income. So we are already doing it. We would love to see a logic coming out from the need of certification, but coming out on the knowledge of what we put in our mouth, forcing the producer to write what there is inside that food in a transparent manner, even in the substantial, the basic one. For me, is very important. We don't use pesticide in Africa where there is massive amount of pest, disease, etc., because through our mechanism of procedure, we don't need pesticide. But there is no way that is written, do you use pesticide or not, on any type of beans that we buy in Europe. So I love what Sasha was saying before. I think moving towards a sustainable land use process as a mechanism would be fantastic. I love it. That's what we are trying to do since I started this operation. But I think Europe should be also doing that so that we compare equal to equal. Because when we buy beans from Eastern Asia, I mean, not Eastern, sorry, I mean Ukraine and farther east, we don't check really the amount of pollution that we are bringing in. But if you buy beans from Kenya, pollution is zero. Poisoning is zero from our beans. So and just to finish, because I think you're raising a very important point.
You know me well. Okay.
I want just to say that what would be fantastic is to have exchange process on those things where we compare equal to equal. Because I don't think we have this equal to equal matching, although the wonderful Codex Alimentarius of my friends in FAO and all the others, but we don't have an equal to equal confrontation.
And that's why I was thinking on the product environmental footprint, because we have a CBAM for GHG for border access. Why do not start giving better market access to companies and products who are more sustainable? But now I want Mustafa.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think, Luca, this cross-cultural and cross-continental partnership is very, very important. You alluded to. And I think that actually replicating models of success in countries which have similar common denominators, agriculture common denominators, which have clusters of farmers, which have land, which are fertile, and which can grow the stuff that you're growing, and trying to see if that can be emulated in other places is, I think, the steps that we really need to take. And that would be key concrete outcomes. And I totally agree. And I think we should talk more about that area and actually make it happen. And Sasha, actually, that is actually a key point which you brought up earlier about the supply chain of making sustainable farming more expensive through those middlemen, which are in between the farm and the table, which actually make it very, very difficult for those farmers to do sustainable farming. Because as it is expensive. And then there's this huge margins made by people who are just doing trading. And it just renders it very, very unaffordable and inaccessible for most of the people, except if you have a higher disposable income and you're very health conscious, you do not have access to sustainable farming, or if you have your own farm, like your mother. So small. So I think that is very, very critical. And what I think has to be done is, of course, Luca, I'm not talking about bypassing governments at all, but what I'm talking about is the need for efficient and effective action. And I think that, for example, what you're doing and what other investors can do in this agriculture climate entrepreneurship, if you will, is what will yield the results that we need in this time of the day. Because those dividends, when other farmers will see farmers in the other village benefiting and their well-being, their lifestyles improving and enhancing, they will want to be part of it. And slowly, I don't want to be too ambitious, but that'll be a snowball effect that we need to see today. So finally, before Arvia stands up again, because I can see she's getting restless, I want to say that what should be one of the key outcomes, and this is your responsibility, Arvia, to make sure this happens, otherwise we'll all hold you to account, is that Luca and us, we try to replicate this in countries such as Pakistan and have this sort of a cross-sectoral partnership where we see what we can do together. And if we can create that impact and that value addition that you are doing in Kenya. Thank you.
We are magically still with 30 minutes left, and I did it really on the run. I would like to tell two things. First of all, I would like to invite Mita for the quest for the sake of fairness to speak about what the role of innovation, obviously, in the transformation of the sector is from their perspective as Planet Farms. But I also would like to tell you that we have an announcement today, small surprise. We are partnering with Knowledge for Innovation, which is a network for innovation, bringing about the twin transition with members of the European Parliament, MEPs. It is a network that has existed with the European Parliament for about 10 years, holding and organizing more than 500 workshops and events around important topics for European policy. And Knowledge for Innovation is also launching a new initiative, which is aimed at bridging the gap for climate finance. And this is another important space. A German, the Knowledge for Innovation chair is a German national, as you might know, Roland Strauss. And the new initiative is called Allied for Futures. And this is what we think we are. And I hope that all together with all the organizations that I invited, forgetting your names, obviously, we will find a way to work together, as Mustafa said. Anyway, Mita, come back and talk about the role of innovation, how your company started thinking, and how you're doing, actually, the scale up of this business that you are setting up.
Well, I think that in our case, innovation makes it possible, as I was mentioning, to produce food everywhere, anytime, reducing drastically food miles, consuming very significant amounts of natural resources. So the very special thing about vertical farming is that it addresses some of the major global challenges that to some extent we're already facing and that we'll have to face even more in the years to come. But as great as that is, we believe that's not enough and that we shouldn't limit ourselves to looking at the things that we're already doing right. And that's why I think it's very important to have in companies people who focus on all ESG aspects at once. As you can sense, we're not strong promoters of the concept of picking your battles. So yeah, as a company, we truly believe we all have a responsibility to do our part, companies and governments especially, and we don't take that responsibility lightly. So to add on the point about the carbon footprint, which we mentioned earlier, I think that among the most interesting findings that we were exposed to over the past year, there was the fact that we compared two scenarios. One in which a vertical farm is powered with methane only, and one where it's powered with renewable energy only. And the difference between the two was astonishing, because while in the first case, the carbon footprint of the process would have been over 2,000% higher than traditional farming, in the second case, it dropped to being 92% lower than open field farming. So that really opened our eyes on the fact that in the end, it all boils down to the energy source that you pick. So for this reason, we decided to start implementing a photovoltaic system in our farm in Cavenago, that we would source all the energy of our future farms with renewable energy only. And we did an in-depth corporate footprint analysis to understand our hotspots and define our climate mitigation strategy in line with the Paris Agreement goals, since we're very firm believers in the importance of having a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan, as there's no doubt that fossil fuel phase out is needed to contrast global warming.
Thank you very much, Meet. I would say that now, really, because we've been creating a workshop more than a panel, and this is exactly what I hoped for us to have today. I will start backwards, and you will choose one topic, and you will tell us what your impressions are, and a suggestion, both in terms of policy and projects. Because the main goal for this panel today, and I think we hopefully are on the way to achieving it, is to attract the attention of the Italian institutions around this company, the companies that are working with us, our foundation, the potential that we have to bring about projects and real change, because we do what businesses do. And we can do it better than governments, but we need governments to guide us. We need regulators to guide us. Go.
Thank you. I will take it from the perspective of renewable energy, because of course this is an essential part of the regenerative economies model, so that it's a very important part of it. So I heard many very common challenges when it comes to, of course, agriculture, and when it comes to food production and renewables, actually. So I heard about the need for scalability. And that's also something that actually we face into the renewables world. So we know that renewables are essential to combat climate change, and we know that we need to build renewables in the best possible way. Now, we have already very good examples of how they can be built in a less impactful way, how we can engage communities, how we can actually have communities being part of the planning phase and not just be informed at the last minute. We have lots of very good practices, but we need scalability. So when it comes to biodiversity in particular, and when it comes to understanding the effects on biodiversity of our energy transition, we need metrics. And this is what is very important, because otherwise we will support the fear, we will increase the fear of greenwashing here. And when it comes to renewables, very much as when it comes to whatever activities that we claim it's sustainable, we need clear metrics. So for instance, the Renewables Grid Initiative has launched this global initiative for nature, renewables and grids, together with IUCN, because we will be looking at metrics. We need to quantify the effects on biodiversity, because we need to avoid as much as possible greenwashing, and to understand how we can effectively contribute to biodiversity targets with our activities. Now, then I also heard about the supply chain, and unfortunately the fact that, of course, all this transition, also bring increasing costs, and this is true. So for instance, in the renewable business, what we are seeing is the introduction of ESGs into auctioning. This can be also a part of course, it does not decrease the price, but actually it ensures that what we are producing is actually in line, especially with environmental and social aspects. Now, and then other key part of everything that we have heard, and it is also applies to the renewable part, is also training. So the need of actually having training, of sharing knowledge, the need of having also informal collaborations. We cannot just wait for governments, so that their action is key, but we need actually to establish more collaborations that enable us to understand, to have a common understanding of the topics, enable us to have best practices that we need to disseminate as much as possible, always looking and then thinking about the metrics that we need to have in common in order to say that the best practices, so that we need to learn. And so that's also what, as Renewables Grid Initiative, we thought that as a global initiative is very much needed, is also to disseminate the knowledge that is needed on the technical, environmental, and societal aspects on grids. And so that we have launched a Grid Academy, which will be very happy.
And we invite you to work together with another of our companies, 3B, which is already working with utilities. And they are a very sustainable company on working on measuring the health of bees. And they are being just co-funded by the EIC Accelerator, the European Innovation Council. And so you will have to meet them, and now let's go to.
That's great, because that's the thing. We have to connect the dots, and also it's not just about sectors. We have to connect all the dots.
That's why our foundation is cross-sector. Lucy.
So I had a conversation when we were preparing for this panel. I had a conversation with Luca and with Avea as well. And we were talking a little bit about regenerative agriculture. And I was saying, actually, I don't think we should be talking about regenerative agriculture. I think regenerative agriculture in itself looks at one part of the food value chain. It puts all of the responsibility, all of the risk of transition on farmers. And it's been mentioned, we've been talking about that it's expensive. Sustainable farming is expensive. Regenerative farming is expensive. But it shouldn't be. I mean, regenerative should be equitable. It should be equitable for everybody. But what we really need to do is move away from this discussion about regenerative agriculture and move more to a regenerative food systems or a regenerative systems discussion, which enables us to put the right business practices in place and the right financial practices in place. We need innovation for that. I mean, we can't do it without innovation. What we're doing at the moment will not enable us to do that. So I like this concept of a regenerative food system where all stakeholders have a responsibility to make that change, to make it work. And there's two things that I feel at the moment are really key within that. One of those is those landscape level changes. So rather than looking at, let's do regenerative on one farm over here and then one farm over here, we look at a landscape level intervention, which involves all actors in the food value chain in that area. We are doing something like this at the moment in EIT Food. We've started to look at a regenerative innovation portfolio, which means that it's a co-investment platform. Everybody comes in together and you look at a landscape. You're not looking at just one value chain in that landscape. You're looking at a number of value chains in that landscape to bring all the actors together to see how this might work, how you might need to develop different business practices, different offtake agreements, for instance, how you might finance this differently.
And this is important to mention because maybe you don't know, the EIT works as a let's say, implementation funding structure on behalf of the European Commission as well.
Yes.
They are opening calls.
Yeah, we've got a load of calls. We've got lots of money. Please look at our website, apply for the funds.
And this is not the only reason why they're here, because they are a knowledge network, a very important one, and they co-shape policy. That's important.
So there's that aspect of it. There's that landscape level intervention, but then I think you can look at it on a different level as well. And this has already been mentioned. It's been mentioned, that transferability of data across the value chain, that information that you can get from pre-farm to farm, across the value chain, right the way to the consumer. Environmental, ecological data, sustainability data, regenerative data, I mean, even health data as well. We have all of this. But the issue that we currently have is that transfer of that data between different stakeholders. There are issues around trust, around sort of traceability, and also around standards. So I really think there's an important piece for us to be doing around looking at what those standards of data are across the value chain of that eco-scoring potential. And that's not just in terms of having an eco label at the end of this. It's actually in terms of the quality of the information that we have. which we can transfer between those stakeholders to make those real informed decisions about regenerative, around sustainability along that value chain.
And I think for our companies, and this is a discussion that I often have with my members, let's use and leverage the potential of the CSRD, the Corporate Social Responsibility Reporting Directive, which is in force since this year, which is already planning ahead how this data across the supply chain will have to be integrated for reporting purposes. At the moment, not everything is still mandatory, but it will be. And this is a collective supply chain efforts, and this is connected to that. And I'm sorry, but I need to let them speak because otherwise, Sasha, last take.
Well, thank you. And so as I already mentioned in the beginning, we already were farther ahead in our thinking some years ago. And well, in the Green Deal, we had this energy pillar, and then we had this land use pillar, the farm to fork strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And that in a way has been sacrificed. And that has been sacrificed in reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when food prices were rising, fertilizer prices were rising, and the reaction was, well, now we have to sacrifice all that luxury projects and we have to increase food production. I think that was a huge mistake. And
food production also increased because fertilizers are gas-based.
Yeah,
this is always a fossil problem, and it's a subsidies problem.
Fertilizer was gas-based, and a lot of the production was in the countries involved. Now, I think this was a huge mistake, and I already made an appeal or a suggestion, being one of those direct Germans, to the Italian G7 presidency. So let me make one too to the companies that you are working with, and to everyone else. I think companies have a huge responsibility to speak out that we should not sacrifice the transformation of the food and agricultural sector. This has already, and let me applaud, that happened in the context of the EU restoration law, when the European People's Party, well, followed their populist tendencies and gave up on the EU restoration law. It was the food sector, it was retailers, it was companies like Aldi or Lidl in the German case and others who said, well, no, we need that. We need that.
We did as well.
And
we wrote a letter.
I think this is in the next 5 years, if we want a second von der Leyen commission or whatever we will get, continue with the unfinished piece of business of the farm to fork strategy, the common agricultural policy, but also the extension of agriculture cooperation to other continents. So then we need the corporate sector to say, well, this is not something we fight. This is something that we support, and we expect that for you. We expect your support here because this transformation is the future for business.
Mustafa.
Yeah, I mean, Sasha, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what is really, really critical, as we've briefly discussed earlier, is making those resilient supply chains, which in Pakistan we have seen were completely dismantled by the drought and the floods that we had. And 30 million people were actually dislocated from their houses. And the areas that were actually affected were agriculture farms. So a country which is already suffering from food insecurity had 30 million people, land which is agricultural fertile land, which is of course also the soil was dilapidated and not can't be used for farming in the near future, which is equivalent to about 3 medium-sized European states, by the way, underwater. So what we have to see is how can we develop a basic level of food security for these people who are doing a little more than subsistence farming and earning marginal amounts of income. And on top of that, if we ask them to do sustainable farming, how can we protect their supply chain and their well-being in terms of feeding their families and making a little bit of money And if we understand that these are the most vulnerable people out there and they have to be protected, there has to be, as we discussed, Arvia, in our conversations, about something like climate justice. When these people who are being adversely affected are not responsible for the flash floods that are happening, which are, of course, attributed to the top 3 or 4 polluters of the world, what do we owe these people who are trying to feed the populations of their region and themselves? So I think it brings us to a slightly macro context of what to do when such things happen, when there are these adverse disruptions, which actually have long-term impacts and will have these people to come back maybe in 3 years or 4 years who've lost everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mustafa, you're touching upon the very central question of attribution and climate justice here at the COP. Mita, it will be your turn, and then Luca will close.
Today's conversation leaves me with the impression that there's a lot of virtuous change going on, but also that there's a long way to go to achieve large-scale sustainability, which depends, yes, on saving natural resources, protecting biodiversity, improving accessibility, food safety and food security, and phasing out fossil fuels, but also on knowledge. And on this point, I'm completely aligned with what was previously said. It's very hard to find hard data when it comes to agriculture. We mentioned pesticides earlier, but it extends to most environmental KPIs, which makes it hard to make informed decisions, to create improvement plans, and also to compare apples with apples. So innovation can help, but the most useful tools to achieve this knowledge will definitely be the collaboration between organizations and making data collection and sharing increasingly mandatory so that it stops being a nice to have.
It's not in that. Luca, or maybe it's not online.
No,
yes.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm not yet running away. In a few minutes, I have to, but I'm still there. I think, I mean, Mustafa was very inspiring in his last point, because it's something that is happening today with us. Unfortunately, flooding and drought are happening across Kenya, as well as Mustafa was mentioning. The size is completely different what is happening in Pakistan. But one of the areas where we are operating, which is along the Tana River, which is a very, very remote area of Kenya, has been flooded. 10,000 people have been displaced. Most of them were farmers working with us. And we start to talk with the humanitarian agency, aid agency, etc., and say, look, guys, why don't you provide us the food that is needed to recover the farmer? We have direct contact we know each one of them. And we have a logistic, we have capacity there. We don't make markup of any that is humanitarian. So we don't make it for making any single dollar out of it. Simply our intention, which is very clear, is let's save those farmers which are also producing with us. We have a direct interest, not only human.
And 60% of them are female farmers. So is it correct?
Absolutely, absolutely correct. And we know them. I mean, I'm there very often. All my staff is there. We have 25 people in Tana River. We are able to go home by home and provide food at a cost which is between 20 to 30% of the cost of a humanitarian agency. Because we don't make money, we are there, and we want them to recover the fastest possible so that they make money. We have added up an extra premium for all our people, all farmers working with us. We have done a number of things, which is company policy. But it's incredible how we can save money, become much more efficient, knowing our target, just doing the right partnership between the private sector and public sector where it can help. And I want just to finish in saying what Lucy was saying is also so important. We have to think system, which is simple, but it's very complicated, because system is not based on having the perfect plan of execution from here to 5 years from now, but to find those leverage points that trigger changes, which are often unpredictable, and they'll make other changing one after the other, doing track record and data deep analysis. which is a very complicated way of thinking, which we are not normally used to. But I think Lucy is 100% right on that aspect. I think it would be incredibly, and I would be very grateful if I have the chance to be part of that way of thinking, because we see such an importance in that process. That is a massive, giant change and change making globally, not just over Africa.
I will just close with one last remark. Our companies sourcing in Italy along their supply chain, they are paying 10% more than competitors for making sure that protocols, environmentally sustainable protocols, protecting biodiversity, and largely introducing already the norms, the regulations, the suggestions anticipated by nature restoration law for rehabilitating and reinvigorating the soil. So sustainability can be paid when you tackle and address the issue with the distribution, for instance. The same thing, a coffee producer, we're not mentioning the name, but is exercising more regenerative agricultural practices, for instance, in Guatemala, and they pay up to 30% more than suppliers. So it can be done sustainably because those are large companies, and it must be done together. Thank you very much.